and that's what was done. Here, there's a couple of problems. One is that he didn't sell it. Even if he did steal it, they got the original thing back. And two, the only time you sell the slave in Jewish law is sell the person, the thief, as a slave, is if they don't. The reason why they stole is they didn't have money. So they didn't have money, and therefore they stole. What you do is you make them pay restitution, and you give them room and board. Right? They didn't have money, so you help them, but it's a punishment as well. If somebody's wealthy and steals, so essentially they're just a kleptomaniac, you do not sell them as a slave, because it makes no sense to have a klepto in your house. I'm not sure what the punishment is, but you don't. So here, Judah, and that's how this week's portion, and he said, approached Joseph extremely harshly. And they said to them, hey, you can't take him as a slave. Right? It's unfair. And secondly, I told you before we brought him up, and just in fairness, he's unable to leave his father. His father already lost one son. His father cannot lose another son. So then Judah, said the ultimate thing that made Joseph really just break down and reveal himself. Judah said, take me. I will be the slave. Let him go and take me instead. So at that point, and this is what teshuvah is. Teshuvah is if you're in a similar position to help somebody or hurt somebody, and you don't or you do, right? And you do the opposite of the sin that you did, and you're in a similar position, but did the opposite. This time you did the right thing. That is teshuvah. Baal Shem Tov used to say frequently that how do you know your teshuvah is accepted? When you find yourself in a similar conundrum, but this time you pass. Judah was the one that said, let's sell Joseph. Right? Judah was the one that said, let's sell him as a slave. Get rid of him. Let's get him out of here. Right? Here, Judah says, this one should not be a slave. Take me instead. Let me get out of here. And it was at that point that Yosef basically said, OMG, this is teshuvah. Teshuvah is complete. Now, what's interesting is that Judah called Benjamin a na'ar, a young lad. So, you think of a young lad, he's a 16-year-old teenager. What do you want from him? Benjamin was actually a father of 10. So he was no young lad, except for his father, he was the lad. His father, he was the youngest, so he was a lad.
What's the passcode?
Oh, go to WhatsApp, the Torah study. Do you have that?
Yeah, I didn't see it on
Oh,
there.
yeah, that's how I got in.
Okay.
That's how I got in. It's the same one as last Sunday and the Sunday before. So that's when Joseph. So now Joseph, he could no longer contain himself. He asked everybody to leave, and he raised his voice in a cry, and he says, "Ani Yosef, ha'od avichai. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Right? And he says, and the brothers were just astonished. The brothers were just was just completely blown out of the water, right? They couldn't believe this is Joseph, and they weren't able to answer him. And so Joseph told them, hey, al teyatzu, don't be sad, don't be depressed, think nothing of it. You sold me, true, but ultimately by selling me was God's plan, and I saved your life. So even though it was 20, even though it was 13 years later, there was a 13-year hiatus. Right, Joseph was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh, and he was 17. So it was 23-year hiatus. And he said, don't be sad. God sent me as your godsend, so you should have food to be able to eat. And now there's a whole different there's a commentary when he said Ani Yosef Od Abichai. I'm Yosef, is my father still alive. The brothers just told him that if we don't, we're going to kill Yaakov. Our father's, is going to be so pained and he will die, etc. He will not be able to tolerate it. He'll be in such mourning. So why is Yosef said Ani Yosef Od Abichai? So the commentaries explain that Yosef wasn't asking. Yosef was telling them, Ani Yosef, I'm Yosef. And to prove it, I keep on asking about my father. I know my mother passed. I was there when she gave birth to Benjamin. So that's why I kept on asking you, is my father still alive? That's one of my proof texts. In the Medrash, it says that Yosef also showed them his Jewishness by showing them that he had a bris. Nobody in Egypt had a bris, right? And he said, look, I have a bris.
But didn't he make all Egyptians get a circumcision by that point?
No, not yet. Not yet. At the end of the Parshat. So anyway, he said that sent me here to provide you. God sent me here to give a respite and to give you food, etc. Go tell Father that I'm alive, and go tell him that I'm a ruler over Egypt, which is an odd thing to say. Go tell Father I'm alive and come down here. Why tell him I'm a ruler over Egypt? So this is a Hasidic twist. The Hasidic twist is that he says that go tell Father I'm alive, not only physically, but I'm also spiritually alive. I haven't become a polytheist or a pagan or an idol worshiper, etc., etc. Go tell him that I rule Egypt. Right? Egypt doesn't rule me. I haven't succumbed or acquiesced to Egypt. I'm the ruler of Egypt. And Ridei Eli, therefore come down, Al Tamid. You're not going to be disappointed that I've kept up your teachings. And so come down and you'll live in Goshen. Why Goshen? Goshen was a suburb. Goshen was the Great Neck of New York City, Great Neck of New York City. But and it had many fields, and it was placed for the animals to pasture, etc. But Goshen is interesting. Goshen is when the power of the kingdom of Mitzrayim, if you remember, Goshen, Pharaoh, he abducted Sarah, and he tried to have relations with her, and he got very sick, and his household got very sick, and he let her go. And it says he gave her presents. One of the presents was he gave them a piece of land in Egypt called Goshen. So the Medrash says, go, you can go live. It's your property. It belongs to Grandma Sarah. So come to Goshen.
Not affected by the famine.
Goshen. So I think the entire Egypt was affected by the famine, but it was a prairie. It was the plains. It wasn't New York City. It was just Schmidt's farm, right? It was the whole entire Egypt was affected, but
They
it
still had
grass,
cattle.
right? They still had grass. They didn't have wheat or anything, but they had certain things. Animal fodder can grow in the desert, that the mountain goats eat, right? So he says, and he says another 5 years. quickly. And then it says that he cried, they all cried, and he kissed his brothers. And he says that but he fell on Benjamin's neck and he cried a lot. So Rashi says, and Benjamin cried on his neck. So they embraced and they cried. So of course they're biological brothers, both sides, not half brothers, etc. But Rashi says that at that time Joseph cried because he had a prophecy that the temple, which was in Benjamin's property, Yerushalayim, belongs to Benjamin, was going to be destroyed and to be exiled. So he cried. And Benjamin cried because the Mishkan Shiloh, which was in Joseph's property, was the Mishkan was stolen. The ark was stolen, and therefore he cried. So they had a prophecy at that time. Anyway, Pharaoh heard that the brothers of Joseph had come, and he was very pleased. Why was he pleased? Up until then, who was Joseph? Joseph was an ex-con. The Pharaoh brought, and he had good advice, so he elevated him. But Pharaoh always had this bad feeling that Joseph is a nobody. He doesn't come from any, he has no pedigree. Once he heard that he has brothers, his father is the illustrious Jacob, who's the grandson of Abraham, who everybody had heard about as a pioneer in monotheism. He said, "Oh my goodness, he is royalty after all. He has this incredible pedigree." So he was very happy, and he said, "Bring him down, right? This is all part of God's master plan. Bring him down, and because it's tough going." It's tough going because of the famine. Bring him down. Pharaoh thought, if this guy is so brilliant and so capable, you imagine I get 70 of them. It's going to be unbelievable. So he said, bring him down. And he says, don't worry about what you have there. Don't worry about, which is a lesson, by the way. It's amazing. He says, don't worry about don't worry about what you have in Canaan. No, just come down to Egypt. Leave everything. Just leave. Save your lives. Come here and run. Run and come here, rather. And which is so incredibly perceptive of Pharaoh, because we know that so many Jews in so many places, when the jig was up and they had to leave because of Bolsheviks, or they had to leave because of, the communists, or they had to leave because of Nazis, or they had to leave because of Muslim attacks. They said, we're not going to leave. We have property here. We have this here and that here. There's a reason why there's 30,000 Jews still in Iran. They didn't want to leave, right? And they want to leave. And I read a book. I think it's called The Pity of It All. And it sort of gives you from when time Moses Mendelssohn entered Prussia, I think, until Hitler's war, to the Third Reich. And basically, so that what the book discusses is that the Jews of Germany, right? If any Jew in Germany was killed, it's because they knew most Jews, by the way, the killings really happened in Poland and not in Germany. Most German Jews were not killed, but for the 300,000 or whatever it was that were killed in Germany, it was because they didn't want to leave. Every writing was on the wall, right? Every single writing was on the wall. Even Moses Mendelssohn, who came 100 years before, even then, some German official made a comment and said, "This is a Jew we respect. We don't respect the other Jews, but this philosopher, he brings pride to Germany." But so there was anti-Semitism from anyway. So, and they didn't leave. In this book, The Pity of It All, it actually blames, which is interesting, and maybe some of it is due. It blames the rabbis of congregations. When they said, "Rabbi, I think we need to leave. They're getting closer. they're 400 miles away. I think we got to start running. And the rabbis didn't want their congregations to fall apart. And they said, no, Hashem. Which is bitachon is part and parcel, but the Jews in Poland were just decimated.
Live where?
Well, so a lot of them ran to the east, and they made it to they made it to, first of all, they made it to Shanghai, or if you didn't make it as far as Shanghai, you made it to Uzbekistan, to Kazakhstan.
You know what it was like to run into Soviet Union? It's going from one country to another. You don't know what the way is really there. You could get around.
So the Jews in Tashkent, right, in Uzbekistan, they were treated decently by the Uzbeks.
It was very hard.
It was hard to live because there was no food.
And hard to get the.
It was hard to get the show. They had to walk thousands of miles. They literally walked thousands of miles. Right. So I spoke to people, like family members who did that walk. Right. Their feet are all mangled. It was freezing cold, and they walked and they survived. They had lemons. They survived on lemons. That's what he told me. Says lemons saved my life. Anyway, so Yosef sent wagons. He goes, go. Right? And he said to his brothers, he said, listen, I'm going to, he gave them clothes, and Benjamin, he gave 5 sets of clothes. Once again, he wanted to see if there's any like bad look, tough look, because then, right? And then he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of, he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of silver. He didn't give the brothers money, right? And so the commentators explained that he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of silver, basically for pain and suffering that Benjamin had over his disappearance, his older brother disappearing. And why 300 is because they sold him for 30 shekels or something. So for each brother, he gave him 10 times as much for each 30, right? For each brother that sold him, he gave Benjamin. And to Yaakov, he sent wagons of food and just etc. And he says, don't fight on the way. He says, go tell father. So they told father. They didn't know. So the Medrash fills in the blanks here. They didn't know how to tell Yaakov because they didn't want to give Yaakov a cardiac arrest. Dad, Yosef's alive. So one Medrash says that they got Usher's daughter, Serach bat Usher, who had a beautiful voice and could play a musical instrument. And she wrote lyrics to her melody that Joseph's alive. And she was strumming it, right? Joseph's alive. He's alive in Egypt. And that's how they that's how they told him. There's another commentary that says they told him saying, "Oh Joseph, hi, there's another character by the name of Joseph. We thought Joseph was such a name that you gave, that Rachel gave, that God should give me another son, right? And he says, and he's a ruler in the whole of Egypt." And he goes, "What are you talking about? There's no other Joseph. Joseph's such a unique name." And anyway, they told him everything that Joseph said. They said, "No, Dad, this is right." And so that's how they started the conversation. There's another Joseph. Then they told him everything, right? And Yaakov's spirit was returned. For all this time, he was melancholy. For all this time, he did not have prophecy. Prophecy was taken from him because of his depression. So depression and having prophecy are antithetical. So he, once his depression lifted, ruach Yaakov, the spirit of Yaakov was revived. 2 verses later, it says, and God spoke to Jacob. right? So never, it didn't say God spoke to Joseph. After Joseph was sold, nowhere does it say that God spoke to Jacob. Anyway, so so then after his spirit was revived, Jacob said, Rav, enough. Oh, Joseph and Ichai, that other Joseph that you speak of, I agree, he's my son, and he's alive, and I'm going to see him before I die. And as they journeyed, God came to him, and God said, you're going down to Egypt. I'm going to go down with you. When you come up with Egypt, I'm going to come up with you. What does that mean? What does that mean? So there is a Hasidic discourse. I think it was the very first one that Rebbe said, where the Rebbe expounded the concept that when a Jew suffers, God suffers along with them. When Jews are in exile, God is in exile with them. So it's not that just the Jews go into exile and God whistles Dixie, but rather God is in exile. God is in exile with the Jewish people. So he said, I'll go down with you. I'm going to come up with you. In other words, that God is also brought down into exile, into a place where he doesn't want to be. But that's the game he set up. So God goes down also. Anyway, they came and they came down to Egypt, and the Torah counts how many, and the Torah says there was 66, I'm sorry, plus Joseph and his 2 sons equals 70. Now you do the math. The 66 plus 3 is not 70. It's 69. But the Torah says 66 plus Joseph and Yotzei Chalatzav, those who were born, Menashe and Ephraim, equals 70. So they said, where'd you get 70? So the Talmud says,
Yocheved.
Sorry?
Yocheved.
Yes. So Yocheved. So the Talmud says, and Rashi quotes the Talmud, that they had 69 coming down to Egypt. Yocheved, the mother of Moses, was born as they were waiting at the border. So as they were entering Egypt, Yocheved's mom gave birth to Yocheved. And so it truly was 69, 70. 69 journeyed, but 70 entered Egypt. Right? And it also uses the term, he says, these are the names of the children of Israel that are coming to Egypt, not that came. And Rashi says, make no big deal. Boy and bow, grammatically, it's correct. Right? But there are commentaries who say, once again, more of Hasidic persuasion, who say, no, that we as Jews are constantly coming into exile. Every time a child is born into exile. That's Ba'im, coming. The Bnei Yisrael, until we end exile, we're constantly, every day we're in exile. There's a Gemara, it's a very sobering piece of Talmud, that says that if Mashiach doesn't come in your lifetime, it's your fault. Right? If Mashiach doesn't come in your lifetime, it's the generation wasn't worthy. Right? And the buck stops here. And Yaakov made his way down. As he was making his way down, he sent Judah to go ahead. He said, Judah, you go to Goshen, lahoros lefanav. That's verse 29 in chapter 46. And it's verse 28, I'm sorry. He sent Judah ahead of him to prepare ahead of him. Right? Rashi says what? To prepare ahead of him? To prepare a house of study. When Yaakov got there, he wanted to hit the ground running for the tribe of Levi. We're always studying the pursuits of monotheism, whatever Abraham had taught, whatever Adam had taught Abraham, through the generations, they had certain knowledge. So he says, we gotta make sure that Goshen, that we don't want to go into Goshen unless it's ready for us. like halachically, it's interesting. Halachically, you're not allowed to move into a town or a city that doesn't have a shul or a mikveh. You're not allowed to. Not allowed to. So there was once this non-Hasidic Orthodox rabbi who questioned the Rebbe. He says, "How could you send shluchim to towns that don't have a shul, a school, yeshiva, or a mikveh?" Right? So the Rebbe says that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly why I'm sending them. So he says, "Yeah, but you're not allowed to." And the Rebbe says, "How's it ever going to be corrected?" Right? I remember before I came on Shlichus, so I was called into the Rebbe's secretary's office. The Rebbe's secretary's office was the size of the Chai Center bathroom stall. That's how big it was. Right? There was enough for 2 chairs and a small table. And he was an old man. He was sitting down. The Rebbe put all his trust in him. And the Rebbe discussed and strategized over things he was going to do with him. Right? He was the Rebbe's personal secretary. He also ran Merkos. And one time he gave the entire office a raise. And the Rebbe called him in. And the Rebbe says, "So me, I don't get a raise, huh?" And he goes, "Okay, I'll give you a raise." All right? So Rabbi Chadakov. His head at that point, he was old and he was, he bent and he looked up like this. Anyway, he says, "Okay, so you're about to move to a new place. I've been instructed to tell you that you need to build a mikveh within a year." So I said to him, "There is a mikveh 5 miles away. Come on." So he goes, 5 miles away, 5 miles away. Okay. So there's a mikveh 5 miles away. But that was one of the things he told me. He told me a number of things, but that was one of the things he told me. When the Komak mikveh closed down, right, I remember that instruction. And the day it closed down, we were working on plans here. And I said, "We need a mikveh." That one closed down. We need a mikveh. I only got a year to do it. Right? Because that came straight from the Rebbe. So I made plans to build a mikveh, and it was completed within the year of that closing down. So it's actually an interesting, because if he didn't tell it to me, I never would have thought of it, right? The flack I got for building a mikveh here, and I still get flack. Last week there was a Suffolk Board of Rabbis meeting about what to do with the Chai Center mikveh, because they want to rebuild the Suffolk County mikveh, but it doesn't make sense because they're there. So one of the rabbis says, "I'm going to raise money for it personally. I'm going to get that mikveh built, and then we can all tell Sachs to close his mikveh." So I still get flack for it, right? The mikveh ain't closed in, but I still got flack for it. But that was the instruction. So he said, "Okay, get yeshiva, get a mikveh, get Yehuda, go. It reminds me of this story with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, was sentenced to death for treason against the government, for spreading Yiddishkeit. The government said, "You can't do this, that, and the other," and he had underground schools. And Schneerson was the enemy of the state. Even today, by the way, they don't like that name Schneerson, right? In the annals of the Politico, there, Politburo, I should say. So he was sentenced to death, and the president of the United States, I forget which president, intervened, and in the end, he was exiled. Sentence was commuted, but they kicked him out. And they sent him to Kostroma. So they told him, okay, they came in and they told him leave, right? He goes, "Leave where?" He goes, "You catch a train today and it will take you to Kostroma." He goes, "When would the train arrive in Kostroma?" So it was Wednesday. It was a Wednesday. They said, "Well, the train will arrive on Saturday." He goes, "I'm not leaving. I'm staying in jail." Right? "Or let me go home." And so, "We're not letting you go home. You're exiled. You have to leave from here to the train." He goes, "I'm not leaving. He goes, "I'll leave on Sunday." They said, "You're going to rot in jail till Sunday?" He goes, "I'll rot in jail till next year. I'm not leaving if I have to take a train that I have to get off the train on Shabbat." So they let him stay for a few days in jail. He called Rabbi Michal Dvorkin, a chassid of his. He called him in to the jail and he says, listen, I'm leaving Sunday, right? I'm going to get there Tuesday or Wednesday, right? Can you take the express train, get there Friday, and on Sunday build a mikveh? So I know there's a mikveh there when I arrive, right? So they kicked him out and he went to Kostroma. By the time he got Kostroma, there was a crude mikveh built for him and the women and his wife, etc., so that he could use the mikveh in Kostroma, right? That's what he thought about. Not that I'm going to see my wife, see my kids, see my this, right? We need to get that mikveh in Kostroma because there's going to be a community there now, right? So that's what Jacob did. So he met Yosef, and Yosef cried greatly. It doesn't say that Yaakov cried greatly. Rashi comments that Yaakov didn't cry. At that moment of the most softest emotional, spiritual experience, Yaakov hugged his son and said the Shema, and didn't cry. He wanted to thank God, and he said the Shema. So Joseph cried, Jacob didn't cry. So they tell a story of the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he was sitting and he was studying, and he looks over and he sees the crib of his son, which became the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And his son was a baby in a crib. And he gets up and he walks over to the crib and he sees this angelic baby, cute baby, he's sleeping, red hair, right? And he bent down to give him a kiss and he stopped. And he didn't kiss the child. He went back to his table and he wrote a Hasidic discourse. And he hid it. He didn't make it public. At the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe's bar mitzvah, the Rebbe Rashab said, I want to give you a kiss. And he told him the story. I was about to give you a kiss. And I remember what Yaakov did when he was overcome with emotion, how he praised God. So I wrote a Hasidic discourse instead of giving you a physical kiss. He says, this is called a Hasidische Kush, a Hasidic kiss. And he gave him this present manuscript of a Hasidic discourse that he wrote in honor of him being a baby, and he gave it to him on his bar mitzvah day. I don't think like that. I don't know if you think like that. I don't think like that. My mind doesn't work that way, right? Right. I give my kids a kiss, and then we take them to Sweet Expressions, and we buy a razzle dazzle and hot chocolate, right? No, I didn't have a razzle dazzle. I didn't. I'm trying to lose weight. I didn't even taste it. So Yaakov turned to Yosef and he said, "Wow, I finally get to see it now. Now I could die." Now he was a little bit dramatic because he didn't pass for 17 years. But he said, "Now I can die. I can die in peace," type of thing. So they had to come to Pharaoh. Pharaoh wanted to meet the family. So Yaakov took 5 brothers. He didn't take the entire family. He took 5 brothers. And with these 5 brothers, he took the weaker looking brothers. And the weaker looking brothers stood in front of Pharaoh and he goes, Mama Sechen, what do you do? What's your job? He goes, we're shepherds. He says, but the problem is there's not enough grass in Canaan because the humans are eating it. So that's why we had to come. So he said, okay, you're in Goshen. Goshen has plenty of grass. And he goes, and if you're shepherds, I actually need consummate shepherds. So if any of you wishing to pasture the royal sheep, that would be great too. And so, because he felt if he would have brought in, Jerry Cohen and Fabio Novik, they would have made them go to war, or Alex Nakanovich. So he brought in Sachs, right? He probably brought in David Winter, who looks like 16, right? And Sachs. And he's born in the weaker brothers.
They undervalue their intellectual capacity.
So then Yaakov came. Yaakov blessed him. And Pharaoh asked the strangest question. Hey, bud, how old are you? How old are you? So Yaakov answered, I'm not as old as I look. My life has been bitter. But I'm not about to die soon. I haven't reached the age of when my parents died. And Yaakov blessed Pharaoh. So they asked, why would Pharaoh ask him his age? So the Midrash tells us that when Yaakov came, the Talmud also mentions it, when Yaakov came to Egypt, the famine stopped. All of a sudden, the River Nile raised, and it irrigated the lands, and all of a sudden, things started to grow. And that was, so Pharaoh was saying, if this is in honor of you, I got to know how long I've got, right? It was a very practical economic thing. So he says, I'm here for a while, because I haven't reached the age of my parents. I'm only, whatever he told him, 130, right? I'm 130 years. And he said, Ma'at v'roim, because they're bitter, bad years. Bitter, bad years. So if you just think of this guy's life, by the way, if you just think of his, right, what he had to go through. Anyway, the famine was suspended. Until Yaakov died, there was no famine, and the other 5 years happened at a later time. So they settled in Goshen, and Yosef fed them, took care of them, etc. And Yosef basically collected all the money for grain in the whole land of Egypt. When the grain was used up, they came to him and said, when the money was used up, they said, we don't have money to give you, we're done. So Yosef, think how he enriched Egypt. If you think of Egypt with the King Tut, that was all Joseph's doing. And so he said, okay, so give me your cattle, give me your property. So they gave him the property, and they gave him the cattle. What Yosef did at that time, when they gave him the property, he said, okay, you who live in Ramses, you got to move to, right, Nilus. You that live in Nilus, you're going to move here. He made them all leave their homes, because he didn't want them to say, okay, you give me the property, but you're still living there. So he made them feel like the brothers, strangers in a strange land. Then when that was done, they said, we don't have anything to give except for our bodies. Right? So he also said, okay, if I own you, then according to the law that was given to my father, my great-grandfather Abraham, you need to get a circumcision. They complained to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, do what he tells you. The guy's a whiz. Do what he tells you. If he can make your life better, do what he tells you. So he owned them, but he made a deal with them, and he told them as follows. He said, look, I own you as slaves, but I have no need for slaves. What I'm going to do is, and this is probably the original tax. He said, I'm going to give you seeds, and I'm going to give you property that you can plant on. 20% flat tax, by the way, 20% has to come back to the crown. The rest, the 80%, the 4/5 are yours. 1 is mine. Belongs to the crown, and that's what he did, and they accepted the offer. And he says, however, to the clergy, to the Kohanim, the priests of Egypt, he didn't tax. They didn't have to return. Now, if you think about the United States, right? Everybody gets taxed. There's real estate taxes. However, a house of worship, not an individual rabbi's house or priest's house, unless it's a rectory. I call it a rectory because who knows what goes on there. But the house of worship doesn't pay tax. Right? And Joseph did the same thing. Joseph did the same thing. If you're a priest, if you're a member of the clergy, right, your chapel, whatever, you don't have to. I'm going to give you grain. You don't have to pay me back anything. To me, that is kind of the beginning of this interesting church and state separation. That even in Egypt, 3,500 years ago, they had this relationship. The Torah concludes by saying that the Jewish people lived in Goshen, and they settled there, and they grew there, and they became strong there, right? And then this is the only parsha out of all the 54 parshas that we have that doesn't have a break. Usually between one parsha and the other, you have to have a minimum of 9 letters space, or better yet, a line between one parsha, Torah portion, and the other. In this one, there's 1 letter space. That's it. To teach us that it's an admonishment that the Yidden began to enjoy the Golus. They began to enjoy Goshen. They began to enjoy the Broadway shows in the capital, Ramses. They really became part by Yechazubah. They became strong and enmeshed in it. They began to enjoy the culture of the Egyptian. And because that a lot of them sort of forgot their ways, the Torah basically closes the gap, and to show us that wasn't a good thing. It kind of doesn't want to bring attention to it because it was such a negative thing. So the portion of Vayichi, when it begins, is actually very hard to find, because you're looking for a new parsha, which is easy to find. Sometimes you have 4 lines. Sometimes you have, right, a lot of space. You can't. It looks like just a little space, 1 letter space. The next parsha, and that's how the Torah portion concludes. So God bless. Any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Thou shalt have a good day. God bless.